You are here today because of a coincidence. Somewhere around 74,000 years ago, humanity almost didn't make it. Not from war, not from disease, from a mountain. A single eruption on an island most people couldn't find on a map may have pushed the entire human species to the edge of extinction. Some scientists believe that at one point, the total number of humans left on Earth could have fit inside a few villages. Everyone alive today may descend from that small, freezing, starving handful of survivors. That's the theory. And the deeper you look, the stranger it gets. Let's start where it started. Today, the spot is a lake. Calm water, green hills, tourists taking photos. It looks like nowhere in particular. But 74,000 years ago, that same location detonated with a force that still leaves geologists searching for the right word. They settled on supereruption. Not for drama, because it belongs to a category of eruption so rare, so violent, that nothing in recorded human history compares to it. Picture it, in scale. Mount St. Helens, the 1980 eruption that flattened forests and dominated the news for weeks, ejected roughly 1 cubic kilometer of material. This eruption ejected an estimated 2,800 cubic kilometers. That's not a bigger version of a normal disaster. That's a different category of event entirely. Ash didn't just fall nearby. It buried regions thousands of kilometers away. India, Pakistan, the Arabian Peninsula, deep into the floor of the Indian Ocean. Some of those ash layers, discovered generations later, are still meters thick. Imagine your entire region disappearing under gray dust. Crops smothered, rivers choked, sky the wrong color for years. But the ash wasn't the part that nearly ended everything. The real threat came after. Sulfur gases shot into the stratosphere and spread across the planet, forming a haze that reflected sunlight back into space. Scientists call this a volcanic winter. Global temperatures dropped, possibly by several degrees, for years at a stretch. Try to picture what that meant on the ground. Summers that never fully arrived. Familiar plants failing to grow. Animals that always appeared in a certain season simply not showing up. Hunger becoming a permanent condition instead of a passing one. And humanity, already thin and scattered across parts of Africa and Asia, was suddenly living inside that world with no warning and no way out. Then, decades later, something even stranger surfaced. Not in the ash, in the DNA. Compare humans to other primates and you'll notice something odd. Chimpanzees living 20 kilometers apart in the same forest can carry more genetic difference between them than two humans on opposite sides of the planet. For a species spread across every continent, humans are almost eerily uniform. Something had thinned the gene pool. Something had forced nearly everyone alive today through the same narrow gate. A geologist looking at volcanic ash layers and a geneticist looking at human DNA arrived independently at the same unsettling window in time. In 1998, that connection was formally proposed. The human population, some researchers argued, had crashed catastrophically around the time of the eruption, collapsing to perhaps only a few thousand breeding individuals. Small enough that the survivors' descendants would carry the genetic scar for tens of thousands of years. The researcher behind the theory was geologist Stanley Ambrose, and the idea became known as the Toba catastrophe hypothesis. Geneticists Lynn Jord and Henry Harpending ran the population models to test it. Their estimates lined up with something small, startlingly small. not thousands of scattered groups across continents. A population you could plausibly fit inside a modern stadium. Sit with that for a second. Every stranger you've ever passed on the street. Every face in every video you've ever watched. Every human being alive on this planet right now. If this theory holds, all of it traces back to one thin, fragile thread of survivors that nearly snapped. But then the story took a turn nobody expected. Because if an eruption this catastrophic wiped out nearly all of humanity, the archaeological record should go quiet. Tools should stop. Sites should empty out. Silence should follow the ash for generations. That's not exactly what turned up. An archaeological team began digging in southern India, cutting straight through soil layers laid down directly above and below the ash from this very eruption. If the theory was right, the layer above the ash should tell a story of abandonment. Instead, they kept finding stone tools. On both sides of the ash line, made in strikingly similar styles, before and after, as if the toolmakers had never left. Which means either people in that region weathered the disaster far better than expected, or the eruption's effects weren't as globally lethal as the genetic bottleneck theory suggests. The archaeologist behind this discovery, Michael Petraglia, argued that the picture may be more regional than apocalyptic, devastating in some places, survivable in others, rather than a single planet-wide extinction event. So, which version is true? A species that nearly vanished, or one that endured, battered but intact, in pockets scattered across the map? Right now, nobody can say for certain. Ice cores, ash layers, ancient pollen, and DNA each tell a slightly different version of events, and researchers are still working to reconcile them into one coherent story. What almost every scientist agrees on is this: something happened in that window of time that left a mark on the human species, whether the wound was global or scattered, near fatal or merely brutal. The debate itself tells you something important. Science doesn't always hand you a clean answer. Sometimes it hands you a genuine mystery, still being pieced together by people digging in ash on opposite sides of the world. Now bring it back to you. You live inside an assumption most people never examine, that the world will hold steady, that supply chains won't break, that seasons will behave, that the sun will rise tomorrow exactly as it did today, without negotiation. But your species has already lived through a scenario where that assumption failed completely, where the sky itself turned hostile, where the sun dimmed for years, where survival came down to a small, cold, hungry population finding just enough food, just enough shelter, just enough luck to make it to the next season, and then the one after that. You don't think about any of this standing in a grocery store aisle. You don't think about it complaining about a cloudy week. But somewhere in your cells, you may be carrying the signature of that near miss, a bottleneck close enough to the edge that scientists, 74,000 years later, can still see the mark it left behind. Maybe that's the real discovery buried under all that ash. Not a warning that disaster is coming, not a reason to live in fear of the next eruption, or the next winter, or the next thing you can't control. It's a reminder that your existence was never a straight line. It was a survival story. A small, scattered group of humans, outnumbered by a hostile climate, somehow found a way through. And every ordinary choice, every relationship, every unremarkable Tuesday you've ever lived exists only because they did. You are not just living your life. You're living the afterstory of a volcano that almost erased everyone who came before you, and didn't. And that's the story. A reminder that humanity has survived incredible odds, and every generation carries that story forward. If you enjoyed learning with me, consider subscribing. There are many more hidden stories about our world and our past waiting to be uncovered together. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.